My name is Elena. I'm 56 years old, and right now I'm sitting in my car outside a hospital I no longer want to walk into because every time I do, I feel like I'm betraying someone. I'm a mother. I'm a mother-in-law. And I'm a woman who raised a son I no longer recognize. The doctors say there's nothing more they can do for my daughter-in-law, and yet my phone keeps lighting up with lies from my own child. I never imagined I would be standing between truth and blood, wondering which one would destroy me first. The night I realized where my son really was while his wife was dying, something inside me broke forever. I remember the smell of the hospital before I remember anything else. That sharp, sterile mix of disinfectant and old air that clings to your clothes long after you leave. I used to think hospitals were places of hope, places where people went to get better. That illusion didn't survive long once my daughter-in-law was admitted for the third time in 6 months. By then, hope had become something quieter, more fragile, like a candle you shield with your hands, knowing even your own breath could put it out. She looked smaller every time I saw her. Not just thinner, but somehow reduced, like the world was slowly reclaiming her piece by piece. I would sit beside her bed and talk about ordinary things, the weather, a neighbor's new dog, recipes she used to love, because talking about the truth felt like admitting defeat. Her eyes would follow me as I spoke, and sometimes she would smile, and sometimes she would just close them, exhausted by the effort of being awake. My son wasn't there. At first, I defended him without even thinking. He's working, I told myself. He's tired. He'll come later. I said those words so many times they began to feel like prayers. When nurses asked where her husband was, I answered before she could, my voice steady, confident, convincing even me for a moment. I didn't want her to feel abandoned. I didn't want to believe she was. The crack started with the phone calls. Or rather, the lack of them. I would step out into the hallway, dial his number, and listen to it ring until it didn't anymore. Straight to voicemail. Again. And again. When he finally did answer, his voice sounded distant, distracted, like I had pulled him out of a different life. He always had an explanation ready. Traffic. A meeting. A headache. I clung to those excuses like they were life rafts, even as the water kept rising. One evening, I stayed later than usual. The machines were humming softly, and my daughter-in-law was asleep, her chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. I checked my phone out of habit, and that's when I saw it, a photo posted by someone I didn't even know very well. A smiling face. A car interior lit by streetlights. Laughter frozen in time. And there, unmistakably, was my son in the driver's seat, his arm casually resting on the window, 2 young women beside him, leaning in close. The timestamp told me everything. I remember staring at the screen, waiting for it to rearrange itself into something that made sense. Waiting for context to appear, for a caption that would explain how this wasn't what it looked like. But the longer I looked, the heavier my chest became. My hands started to shake, and I had to sit down in one of those hard plastic chairs lining the wall. I felt foolish before I felt angry. Foolish for believing. Foolish for covering for him. Foolish for sitting beside a dying woman and lying on behalf of the man who promised to love her. I didn't confront him that night. I went back into the room, watched her sleep, and wondered how long a heart could hold this much without breaking. I told myself I needed more information, that I shouldn't jump to conclusions, that mothers don't turn on their children because of a single photograph. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't a single moment. It was a pattern. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. I started paying attention to everything I had ignored before. The way he never stayed more than a few minutes when he did show up. The way his eyes never lingered on his wife's face. The way his phone was always face down, always buzzing, always pulling him away. Each detail felt like another small betrayal, not just of her, but of the person I thought I had raised. I lay awake that night replaying memories of his childhood, searching for the moment I went wrong. I remembered teaching him right from wrong, teaching him kindness, teaching him responsibility. I remember holding his hand on his first day of school, telling him to be brave. Somewhere along the way, bravery had turned into selfishness, and I hadn't noticed. By morning, I was exhausted, hollowed out by thoughts I didn't want to have. I knew something had to change. I just didn't know yet how much it was going to cost all of us. I walked back into the hospital room that morning with a smile I had practiced in the elevator mirror. It felt stiff on my face, like it didn't belong to me anymore. She was awake this time, her eyes open but unfocused, staring at the ceiling as if she were already halfway somewhere else. When she noticed me, she tried to lift her hand. I took it immediately, careful not to squeeze too hard. Her skin felt papery, almost translucent, and I hated myself for noticing things like that, for cataloging signs of how close we were getting to the end. She asked about him in a voice so quiet I almost missed it. Just his name, nothing else. One word that carried so much hope it hurt. I lied without hesitation. I told her he'd been there late the night before, that he was exhausted, that he loved her. The words came easily, which frightened me more than anything. She nodded slowly, as if that was enough to keep her anchored for a little longer, and closed her eyes again. That was the moment I realized my lies weren't protecting her. They were protecting him. Over the next few days, I became two people. The woman sitting at her bedside, gentle and reassuring, and the woman watching her phone like it was a weapon. More photos appeared. More evidence I never went looking for, but couldn't escape. Different faces, different nights. Always the same careless smile on my son's face. He looked young in those pictures, carefree, like someone without responsibilities, without a wife slowly disappearing in a hospital bed. When I finally confronted him, it wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. I called him and asked him to meet me in the parking lot. He arrived late, irritated, already defensive before I'd said a word. I showed him the photos. I watched his face change as he realized I knew. Not regret. Not shame. Just annoyance, like I'd caught him doing something inconvenient. He told me I didn't understand. He said it had been hard. He said he needed an escape. I asked him when she had stopped being a person and started being an inconvenience. He didn't answer. He couldn't look at me. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I gave him a choice then, though I already knew what he would pick. I told him to go upstairs, to sit with his wife, to be there in whatever time she had left. Or I would stop covering for him. I would tell the truth, not out of spite, but out of respect for the woman dying alone. He promised he would come later. He always promised later. Later never came. That night, her breathing changed. The nurse explained it gently, like she was talking to a child. I held her hand and felt it loosen in mine, felt the warmth fade, felt the moment pass where she was still here. My son wasn't there. I was. Afterward, I sat in my car and cried until my chest hurt. Not just for her, but for him, for the life he had destroyed without even realizing it. I knew then that whatever came next would change us forever. I couldn't undo what he'd done, but I could stop lying about it. I went home as the sun was coming up, feeling older than I ever had. I didn't feel powerful. I didn't feel victorious. I felt resolved. The kind of resolve that comes when you finally accept that love doesn't mean silence, and being a mother doesn't mean being blind. Because the truth was already destroying him. I was just done pretending it wasn't. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not my sister, not my friends, not even the neighbors who had watched my daughter-in-law's health fade alongside the seasons. Grief makes you quiet. It folds you inward. And guilt does something worse. It convinces you that if you speak, you'll be the one on trial. I moved through the days after her death like a shadow in my own house, answering condolences with nods and practiced phrases, all while carrying a truth that burned against my ribs. My son avoided me. At first it was subtle, missed calls, delayed replies, but then it became obvious. He didn't come by. He didn't ask how I was sleeping. He didn't ask anything at all. It was as if, by staying away, he could keep the world he'd built from collapsing. I wondered if he thought silence would protect him the way I once had. The funeral arrived gray and heavy, the kind of day where the sky feels complicit. I stood at the front beside her family, people who had welcomed my son as their own, people who trusted him with their daughter's life. I felt their grief like a physical weight, and every time someone thanked me for being there for her when she needed it most, I felt the lie tighten around my throat. My son arrived late, sat in the back, and left before anyone could speak to him. I watched him go and realized something had shifted inside me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. Clarity is dangerous. It strips away excuses. It leaves you alone with choices. That evening, I asked him to come over. No urgency in my voice. No accusation. Just a request. He showed up defensive anyway, his shoulders tight, his eyes already preparing for battle. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I told him I was done lying. I told him people were asking questions, and I would no longer answer them for him. I told him his wife deserved the truth, even now, especially now. He laughed at first. A short, disbelieving sound. He said I was overreacting. He said no one needed to know everything. I asked him who everything was hurting. He didn't answer. He accused me of trying to ruin his life. I told him quietly that he had done that himself. The room felt smaller with every word, like the walls were closing in to listen. When I told him I had already spoken to her parents, his face changed. Not rage. Not sorrow. Fear. Real, unfiltered fear. He asked me how I could do that to him. I asked him how he could do what he did to her. We stared at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with the space between us. The fallout was immediate. Calls stopped being returned. Invitations disappeared. Whispers grew louder. I heard things through other people. Fragments of consequences reaching me secondhand. He lost friends. He lost work opportunities. He lost the narrative he had been living inside. And with every loss, he grew smaller in my eyes, not because he was being punished, but because he was finally being seen. I didn't feel triumph. I felt grief layered on grief. I missed the boy he had been. I missed believing that love could fix everything. But I also felt something steadier beneath the sadness, something like integrity knitting itself back together after being torn apart. One afternoon, weeks later, he came back. He looked exhausted, older somehow. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He asked why I hadn't protected him. I told him the truth, that protecting him would have meant erasing her, and I refused to do that. I told him that accountability isn't cruelty, and love isn't blind loyalty. He cried then, quietly, for the first time. I didn't hold him. I sat with him. There's a difference. As he left, I understood that whatever remained between us would have to be built on truth or not at all. I stood in the doorway long after he was gone, feeling the weight of what I'd chosen, and for the first time since she died, I could breathe without feeling like I was betraying someone. The house felt different after that conversation, like it had finally exhaled. For months, I had been living with tension humming through the walls, through my own body, and now there was just quiet. Not peace, not yet, but an honesty that no longer demanded I pretend. I began sorting through things I had avoided since her death. A card she had written me, a scarf she left behind after one of her last visits, still faintly carrying her perfume. I cried when I found it, but the crying felt clean, not tangled up with lies. People started talking to me differently, too. Not with suspicion or confusion, but with something closer to respect. Her mother called me one evening, and we spoke for hours. We didn't talk about him much. We talked about her laugh, the way she used to hum when she cooked, how stubborn she could be about silly things. At one point, she thanked me for not letting her daughter disappear into a story that wasn't true. I sat on the edge of my bed and held the phone to my chest after we hung up, realizing that this was what accountability looked like on the other side. Quiet, painful, necessary. My son spiraled in his own way. I heard about it without asking. Missed rent. Lost friendships. Nights he didn't remember clearly. I didn't rush in to fix it. That was the hardest part. Every instinct in me screamed to intervene, to smooth the path, to make his suffering stop. But I had finally learned the difference between support and sabotage. Saving him from consequences would have taught him nothing. Letting him face them was the only chance he had to change. Months passed. Seasons turned. Grief softened at the edges, though it never left. One afternoon, He showed up again, thinner, quieter, stripped of his excuses. This time, he didn't blame me. He didn't argue. He said he finally understood what he had lost, not just his wife, but himself. He said living with the truth was harder than living with lies, but it was real. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rush to reassure him. I let him sit in the discomfort, because growth doesn't happen without it. When he left that day, I noticed something I hadn't before. He thanked me, not for protecting him, but for stopping. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against it, tears slipping down my face, not because everything was fixed, but because something had finally shifted in the right direction. I think about her often, about the nights she lay in that hospital bed, believing she was loved, believing she wasn't alone. I wish things had been different. I wish she had received the devotion she deserved. But I know this. I honored her in the only way I still could. By refusing to lie. By refusing to let her story be rewritten to make someone else comfortable. Being a mother doesn't end when your child becomes an adult. But it changes. Love matures or it rots. Mine had been rotting quietly in the dark, fed by fear and denial. Telling the truth was like opening a window and letting light pour into places I didn't want to see. It hurt. It still does. But it also saved me from becoming someone I couldn't live with. If there is a lesson in all of this, it's not about punishment or revenge. It's about responsibility. It's about understanding that love without integrity is just attachment, and attachment can be dangerous. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone you love is to stop lying for them, even when it costs you the version of them you wish still existed. I didn't destroy my son. His choices did that. What I did was step out of the way and let the truth do its work. And in doing so, I found a version of myself I didn't know I still had, a woman who could grieve honestly, love bravely, and stand firm when it mattered most.